All right, I thought I would dictate my beliefs in a more succinct manner in regards to God and so on. Because I'm generally a fan of Doug Wilson and his Christchurch Canon Press and blog and my blog sort of thing. But I also study Gavin Ortland, Athonite Audio, Desiring God, which is John Piper's ministry. Father Spiridon, Spy Ridon, um, Father Moses, Bishop Robert Barron, Sundays with Ascension, and Ascension Presents, which are Father Mike Schmitz or his colleagues of the monkish orders and so on. Um, but I'm also a very believe it when I see it kind of guy. Now, for the record, my previous video, Spooky Spurging and Proven Prophecy Exists with Evidence, should denote why the kind of thing that I'm serious about prophecy and God existing and so on. But the question is, do I believe in Sith lightning from your fingertips level magic in terms of miracles? And the answer is no. I believe in an ordering principle of the universe that is cognitive or cognition or conscious or willful or soulful or something like that in a more psychological way than I do in terms of a spiritual, sort of vague spirituality kind of way. But I also believe evolution exists and so on. Whether I'm a universalist or I'm some people go to hell forever and some people go to heaven forever kind of guy, I've never made a decision on. I hold it in tension, kind of. But there's a certain leaning while staying rooted in the in between zone towards universalism, a lean towards universalism, while being rooted in the some people go to hell, some people go to heaven forever kind of situation. If anyone can save a soul, it's God. And I don't know what happens in the afterlife, and no one else does either, basically, and so on. So, however, I'll give an example of the kinds of spooky things I've had happen to me in the years and so on, which is when I was about 13 or 12 or something. I went to summer camp, and someone convinced me Wicca is a real religion and has its own tenets and so on, and has an ordering of the world and so on. And kind of like believing in it because it seemed kind of possible or was really cool and I wanted it to be true from the secular atheist worldview and just kind of being bored. I leaned into it and said, okay, if it's possibly true, then that's kind of cool. Because like they mentioned like wizards and like priests and like Dragon Ball Z style people and so on. I was like, I really want a key blast. That sounds cool. Anyways, later on in summer camp, I glared at someone and jabbed my finger at them and wished them ill. And they suddenly stumbled and said, ow. And I was like, oh, maybe that's wicked magic, so I shouldn't do that. Because I've always been kind of rooted in the paladin, sort of like service of knight of God kind of approach to the world. But I'm also rooted in a sort of wizard INTP from the Myers-Briggs type indicator, wizard sort of approach to life dispositionally. So it's a bit of a paladin and a wizard. Um, I've talked with Grok about my experiences and so on, and it seems to have settled. I've been using it as a sort of web crawler for me for different ideas. And it came up with 14 levels in Paladin 5th edition, because I specified 5th edition, because that's where all the class and specialization stuff really developed. And 3 levels in Divination Wizard, Diviner Wizard, and 2 to 3 levels in Great Old One Warlock. And if it's 2 levels in Great Old One Warlock, then it's 1 level in Bard. As you can tell, this is a fairly charisma-heavy sort of setup. With a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of intellect, lots of strength, constitution, but mostly charisma. Now, if you check out my Battle Scars Fight and Sin video, you might be amazed by the level of times I've tried to destroy myself, and like the seriousness of my attempts, and like how I survived it all. And if you look at my spooky spurging and provide proof of prophecy with existing with evidence, spooky spurging and proving prophecy exists with evidence. You'll be kind of surprised by the level of sheer balls to the wall numbers of times that something I know the search results of has happened, and someone seems to have searched it up way before. Now, I've said before that I am the person that searched those things up. I am the person that searched those things up. That's why I remember doing it. That's why I know what terms to look for. And you might say, oh, well, you just stumbled across it. And the answer is, how can someone stumble across these random things 43 times statistically? It seems statistically impossible unless someone's doing it day in, day out. And the truth is, I only gained it over 1 or 2 days of searching, and like the Charlie Kirk martyrdom thing was me deciding to look it up because I remember doing it. And I looked up martyr first, and then I looked up assassination because I was like, oh, martyr didn't work, but I know it's something like that. And then I looked up martyrdom because I was like, oh, right, the first term's probably correct, but I got it slightly wrong, which is why it didn't show up. Because Google search terms requires an exact search term. No letters off, no extra letters, no missing letters, just exactly the right term specifically to show the right details. So what's the deal? And the deal is, in this life, we will know death. Everyone that's alive will know death in this world. The new heavens and earth that is promised by God with the perfect body and so on might be true, but in this world we will know death. And the young earth creationists kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But as of remembering my previous experiences and verifying it with the search term results thing, which is my spooky spurging videos, proof of it, and synchronicity, and my statistically impossible kind of brushes with death and surviving it, and the statistically impossible sort of search term results knowledge, I'm pretty convinced of a God existing and so on. But the problem is the divide between secular knowledge of the world and biblical knowledge of God. and the divide that people have when they emphasize one at the expense of the other too much, and so on. So my goal has been to find a path that satisfies my secular experience of just looking at the world and seeing how things operate and so on, while also seeing the underlying meta patterns that hint at God and so on. And granted, I've had a lot of meta patterns that I ignored for some time, but synchronicity is what brought me to it. And what I want to say is there's a ordering principle of the world that is conscious or willful or soul-based, but it's not going to break the secular laws of reality. However, fire tornadoes do exist, so the Exodus story can be true. People have gone into comas and been thought dead and then buried alive and so on, which means Jesus' story can be true, even from a secular standpoint. Maybe the divine appointment of Jesus seems untrue from the secular standpoint alone, but I've already explained my principle on Jesus and the coma concept theory and so on. I do know that a Christian might be rubbed the wrong way from my insistence on it being exactly that way, but the atheist will find it rubbing them the wrong way because I insist that Jesus is the chosen one and the Messiah and so on. So I'm comfortably between the schizophrenic and the autist. Young Earth creationism, insistence on the global flood, doesn't fit with the genre's interpretation of the Bible or the evocative language of the Bible that we know it was common back in the day, before the development of language in a very clinical fashion. And part of the reason for the insistence on a global flood is a clinical assessment of biblical evocative language. And that's an autism problem, basically. I ran into the same problem when I was trying to analyze God being all-powerful versus free will, and you never answer it properly if you do that. The only answer to God being all-powerful and free will existing simultaneously is if you hold that there's some sort of hidden correlation that we'll never know in this life. And that's one of the lessons I want to tell you is there's a lot of stuff that you will never know in this life that is just a paradox on some level. You can lean towards a certain interpretation otherwise, but you cannot run headfirst into that thing. And remember, when you're leaning in something, you're not rooted, your feet aren't planted on that principle, you're not standing your ground on that one principle, you're leaning towards it. The root isn't that thing. So if you can be rooted in a certain divine uncertainty, while leaning towards or favoring slightly towards a certain relationship between God and man, or the world and man, and so on. As a sort of like, that's how it generally plays out kind of situation, but it's not necessarily the one be-all truth. You know what I mean? And this is a higher development of relationship, because most people think you either are something or you aren't something completely, And with God, the thing is, one of the most dangerous things you can do is say that you are definitely one thing or definitely another thing, um, and just try and like, no, 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 I can't hear you, nah, 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 kind of um, information and data and so on. Yeah, just to bash on young Earth creationism, I don't believe Satan hid dinosaur bones in the ground to confuse and trick archaeologists or anthropologists or paleontologists or whatever. Um, and even the Bible says that life was created before mankind was created and so on. And also, I would also heavily emphasize, very heavily emphasize, like extremely emphasize, like this is like the core of my disposition, is we are limited beings in history, looking back on history, um, in order to analyze the potential future based on patterns that indicate some ordering principle. And you could argue that ordering principle is God, or you can argue that ordering principle is evolution. But I would say it's God and evolution. And the thing is, I think the reason why young Earth creationism is so poor as a theological instrument is that evolution, as we understand it in a secular sense, for the most part, indicates a sort of development through the life and death of creatures and mankind and so on that is going to be similar to heaven in a sense, except heaven won't have death as the dividing line. So, well, the people will develop in the finest, most most um, eloquent or elegant fashion of evolution in a sort of your ideas die so your body doesn't have to kind of way, like Jordan Peterson. Um, and the other thing I would mention is there might be something such as a discarding sabbat or sabo, where something is useful for getting you on the path, but then you toss it away when its use is done, and you carry forwards and so on. Sort of like how booster engines on a shuttlecraft is important for getting it to space, but it doesn't keep them once they run out of fuel or something. And that's how I would approach some of the biblical language and so on and so on. So it's useful for getting you on the path, but once you've developed a certain wisdom level beyond the simplistic version, then you're able to remember it for its helpfulness in getting you to this point, but you kind of abandon it in the sense of like you're not relying on that particular thing as the one be all truth. Sort of like how Santa Claus describes your relationship to other people, in that if you're good and generous and kind, it tends to lead towards good things happening for you and so on, and it instills a certain gratitude towards a judge who is merciful even when they tell you good is good, right is right, wrong is wrong, worse is worse, and so on. And they tend to give you gifts even if you don't deserve them entirely or something. You know, sort of Santa Claus as a discarded Sabbath or Sabo or booster rocket to the shuttlecraft that's actually carrying the payload you want to send to the space station, or actually, you know, deploy a satellite telescope to view the universe with, um, is to God in some sense. Um, Now, there's a subtle indication here, which people might not pick up on, and the atheist uses as an excuse not to believe in God. And the Christian looks at it and says, yes, it is a way to approach God, but we don't believe in evolution that way. And that is, there is a stages of development appreciation for something where something can be kind of right on a fundamental level, but it's missing the details. It's a low resolution image. And what you want to do is you want to get into a higher and higher resolution image of God and mankind and the history and so on. And if you're so obsessed with the lower resolution image, you won't get to the higher resolution image that is more accurate on more things and more predictive and so on. And the problem with evolution and young earth creationism is that they're both roughly half the picture. Now, am I saying you should just combine them willy-nilly and so on? No, I'm not, actually. I'm saying I've kind of approached it myself in a certain sense. And you can kind of see the certain sense in my previous videos. My higher resolution analysis. Because the point isn't mush. You don't want mushy centrism. Like, I don't want mushy center right or centrism. I want liberal reactionary. So if you notice, I'm center left, center right, center, and hard right. And that's my higher resolution indication of centrist or center right politically. You know what I mean? The people that don't think things through as much can be roughly correct, but they're missing something crucial in the details. And that opens them up to counter explanations that jar their sensibilities and so on. They've got a rough estimation, but they haven't done the work to get it exactly correct. Now, I'm not saying you can get everything or anything exactly correct perfectly 100% in this life, but you can be a lot closer to it. And there's a humility in approaching infinity or approaching zero in calculus, mathematics, where you get closer and closer to it, but you never actually quite hit it. And that's what I believe in this life. There's always something that you can develop further, and so on. And if you think of the Christian experience with God in heaven forever and ever and ever for eternity, you're always approaching infinity. You enter heaven basically as you are, or cleanse slightly so you're good enough. And some sort of transformation happens and you make the grade, or Jesus makes the grade for you, or whatever you want to call it. And then you're investigating infinity forever and learning more and more and developing and growing more and more and so on into eternity. And what I would like to posit is that evolution is essentially, historically and situationally, the process by which nature shows us this way of being in embodied sense. If you look at the simplicity of early life forms to the complexity of later life forms and so on, especially the mind, so that indicates a certain preferential development for cognitive or intellectual or mental or instinctive or instinctual complexity and adaptation that is similar to how God will treat us individually, not collectively as evolution does, but individually as God will do individually, not collectively through evolution, in heaven, basically, on some level. And this resolves a lot of the tension between evolution and young earth creationism. Now, people claim you can't do that, but I just did, so fuck them. Anyways, that's all I got for now. Thanks.